Late na ba ako? Late na ba ako? Hello? Oh my gosh, I'm in live? No? Ayun! Ay, hello? Ano yan? Vegan. Dahil ba na lang? Okay. Tata. Di pa ako makain daw. Ano lang? Saan na ba kami sabihin? Uh, sorry. Sorry. Good job. Sige, Jen, sa'yo na lang. Sige, Jen. Ah, Jen, sa'yo. Sige. Jen, sa'yo tayo today. Electricity, tayo. Tapos, buksan ang libro ng self-bigay. Sige, may nakita naman ako sa YouTube.
So for today, problems na related sa college.
I hate you.
In this video, we're going to talk about Ohm's law. So what is Ohm's law? Ohm's law describes the relationship between voltage, current, and resistance. Perhaps you've seen this equation. V is equal to I times R. V stands for voltage, I stands for the current, R is resistance. Voltage is measured in the units volts. I, which represents the current, is measured in amps. And R, the resistance, is measured in ohms. Now, you need to know that as the voltage in a circuit increases, the current will increase, provided that the resistance stays the same. If the resistance goes up, the current will go down if the voltage is held constant. So voltage and current, they're proportional to each other, and resistance and current, they're inversely related to each other. Now let's work on a practice problem. Let's say if we have a 12-volt battery connected across a 4-ohm resistor. What is the current flowing in?
3. Kasi 12 volts, diba? 12 volts equals 4 ohms. Kung current is I, ang formula for ohms law is volts equals I times R. Hindi 12 volts equals 4 ohms. So, divide by each side by 4. 4 ohms. So, giving 3 amperes.
This circuit. Conventional current flows from the positive terminal of the battery to the negative terminal of the battery. This is the opposite direction to electron flow. So to find the current in this circuit, we can use Ohm's law. V is equal to IR. So the voltage is 12. We're looking for the current. The resistance is 4. So we need to solve for the variable I. Let's divide both sides by 4. 12 divided by 4 is 3. The current is going to be 3 amps. Now let's say if we have 3 resistors connected in series, like this. Let's say this is R1, R2, and R3, and it's connected across a 60-volt battery. Now let's say that R1 has a value of 3 ohms, and R2 is 4 ohms, and R3 is 5 ohms. So what is the current flowing in a circuit? In order to find the current flowing in a circuit where the resistors are connected in series, you need to find the total resistance. And the total resistance is going to be R1 plus R2 plus R3. You just need to add the values of the 3 resistors. So 3 plus 4 plus 5, that's going to give us 12. So the total resistance in a circuit is 12 ohms. Next, you need to calculate the current. So we could use the formula V is equal to IR. So V is 60. That's the voltage across the 3 resistors. We're looking for the current, and then the total resistance is 12. So you can treat this as if it's one big resistor, and you have a 60-volt battery source across a 12-ohm resistor. What is the current in that resistor?
5.
So what we need to do is divide both sides by 12 to get the current by itself. 60 divided by 12 is 5. So we have a current of 5 amps flowing in this circuit. Now once we have the current, we can calculate the voltage drop across each resistor. What is the voltage drop across the first resistor? Now in this series circuit, the current that flows in a circuit is the same as the current flowing through R3, R2, and R1. Because it's only one half of the current to flow, it's going to be the same, 5 amps. So to find the voltage across the first resistor, we can use the current that flows through the first resistor times the resistance value of that resistor. So we're using Ohm's law, but in a different way. I1 is going to be the same as I, because that 5 amp current is flowing through each resistor. But R1 is different. R1 is going to be 3. So it's 5 times 3. So we have 15 volts across R1. Now what about across R2? What is the voltage across R2? Well, we could follow the same pattern. So we say V2 is equal to I2 times R2. So the current is still going to be 5 amps, but this time the resistance is 4 ohms. So 5 times 4, that's going to give us 20. So we have 20 volts across R2. Now across R3 is going to be V3 is equal to I3 times R3. So I3 is going to be the same as I2 and I1, so that's 5 amps. R3 is 5, so 5 times 5 is 25.
5. 60.
The voltage of the battery is equal to the sum of all of the voltage drops across those resistors. And there's something called Kirchhoff's voltage law, which basically states that as you go around a circuit in a loop, the total voltage will be 0. And it makes sense because the battery, it increases the energy of the circuit because it supplies energy to the circuit, so it increases it by 60. The resistors consume energy. If you have 25, you get 0. Because the energy that flows into a at a positive 60 with negative 15, negative 20, and negative 25, you get 0. Because the energy that flows into a circuit must equal the energy that comes out of the circuit. And that's Kirchhoff's voltage law. It always applies whenever you have a closed loop. So the sum of all the voltages in a closed loop will always add up to 0. Now what's going to happen if we connect 3 resistors in a parallel circuit? Let's calculate the current in such a circuit. In a series circuit, the current flowing through the resistors that are connected in series is the same, because the current only has one path in which it can flow. In a parallel circuit, the current has multiple paths, and so it can vary. However, notice that whenever resistors are connected in parallel, the voltage across those resistors is the same. So let's say if we have, in this case, a 12-volt battery. Each resistor is connected across that 12-volt battery. And so all of them have 12 volts across their terminals. So let's call this R1, R2, and R3. And so let's say that R1 has a value of 3 ohms, and R2 is going to be 4 ohms, and R3 is going to be 6 ohms. What is the current flowing through each resistor? So we can use this formula.
Sige.
V1 is equal to I1 times
Sige, try ko muna.
R1. So remember,
So same. 12 volts. Current. Hindi for sa R1 4 amps, R2 3 amps, sa R3 2 amps.
parallel circuit, the voltage across the resistors connected in parallel is the same. But in a series circuit, the current flowing in resistors that are connected in series will be the same. In this case, V1 is 12, because we have 12 volts connected across R1. So we have a current of V2 is equal to I2 times 12 divided by 4, which will give us the same pattern. And so that's a current of 2 amps.
Feeling ko i-add lang eh. Kasi, hindi 9 amps.
Now, notice that as the resistance increases, the current decreases, as we mentioned in the beginning of this video. Here, notice that R1 has the lowest value, and it has the highest current. R3 has the highest value, but it has the lowest current. So as you increase the resistance, the current decreases. If we increase it to 6, the current decreases to 2. And if we decrease the resistance, the current will increase. If we decrease it to 3, the current goes up to 4, provided that the voltage is held constant. And so you'll see this relationship in a parallel circuit, as you can see here. Or in a series circuit too. You can see that relationship there as well. Now, what is the current that leaves the battery? How can we determine the current that's leaving the battery? The total current in the circuit, which we'll call IT, that leaves the battery, is going to be the sum of the individual currents. So it's going to be 4 plus 3 plus 2. 4 plus 3 plus 2 is 9. So the total current here is 9 amps. Now let's focus on this point. What is the current that is flowing through that branch? Right here. Along, let's say this wire. What is the current in that region? So now we need to use something called Kirchhoff's current law. We saw in the last example that Kirchhoff's voltage law, which basically states that the sum of all the voltages around the loop adds up to 0. Well, Kirchhoff's current law is very similar. The current that enters the junction is equal to the current that leaves the junction. Now let's draw a picture. So we have equal to the current that leaves the junction. It's up to 0. Well, Kirchhoff's current law is very similar. The current that enters the junction is equal to the current that leaves the junction. Now let's draw a picture. So we have 9 amps of current flowing to this point, and we have 4 amps that's leaving it. Now the current that is flowing to a junction must equal the total current that is leaving a junction. So we have to have current leaving in this direction, and it has to be 5 amps because 5 plus 4 is 9. So we have a total of 9 amps of current that enters this junction, and 9 amps of current that leaves it. And so that's the basic idea behind Kirchhoff's current law. So we have 5 amps flowing to the right in this direction. Now out of those 5 amps, 3 amps is going this way. So that means the other 2 amps that leaves it. 5 amps because 5 to a junction to this point, and we have 4 amps that's leaving it. Now the current that is flowing to a junction must equal the total current that is leaving a junction. So we have to...
So, diba, 9 ang total. So, pag dumaan siya dito, wala ng 4. Kasi na-resist na ng resistor na to. Tapos, resist na sa dito. Tapos, pagka-resist niya, 5 na lang, minus 3. 2, saan babalik? 2 na lang, 2 minus 2, 0.
have current leaving in this direction, and it has to be 5 amps because 5 plus 4 is 9. So we have a total of 9 amps of current that enters this junction, and 9 amps of current that leaves it. And so that's the basic idea behind Kirchhoff's current law. So we have 5 amps.
Ano yung spelling niya? Nantok na ako.
Flowing to the right in this direction. Now, out of those 5 amps, 3 amps is going this way. So that means the other 2 amps flows in this direction. And you can see how it's like a river splitting off into 3 directions. So in this section, we still have 2 amps of current that's traveling here. And then when it joins up with the 3 amp current, 3 and 2 will add to 5. And so we have 5 amps flowing in this region. And then the 5 and 4 will get together. And so we're going to have a total of 9 amps of current flowing in this region. And so as you can see, the current that's going this way is going to be the same as this current here, 9 amps. And so hopefully this all makes sense. And so I'm going to give you a basic idea of how to use Ohm's law in a simple circuit, in a series circuit, and also in a parallel circuit. So that's it for this video. Hopefully you found it to be helpful, and it gave you a good understanding of Kirchhoff's voltage law and his current law as well.
Yun. What is this? Sige. So, naging problem na. Yes. Tapos, sagot na. Sir, series tapos, red. Parang red ba? Parang series na. So, series, 11 volts. 1 ohm. 17. 17 amperes. Diba? Ako, may calculator pa na. Doors down and you won't believe it. 17. 4.25 amps. 4.25. 2.125 amps. So, kung pinagsama, 17 plus 4 plus 23.375. Huh? Man.
Suppose you are given this messy electrical circuit with a battery here and a bunch of resistors connected in what looks like a confusing web of series and parallel connections. Then someone comes and says, hey, I want to measure the voltage and current at each resistor, like say if I connect a voltmeter, which measures the voltage across 2 points, at this 15 ohm resistor. I want to know the value of the voltage that it will show. Similarly, if I connect an ammeter, which measures the current across 2 points, beside this 8 ohm resistor, then what will be the value of current that it will show? Before we begin, let me give you a quick revision about voltage, resistors, and current, such that using only these basic concepts, you can confidently tackle even the most complex-looking circuit step by step. You will never need anything else. If we have a resistor and a current flows through it in this direction, then the resistor acts like a voltage eater. It munches on some of the energy from the battery, and this is called a voltage drop across the resistor. The voltage drops in the direction of the flow of the current. So, if the current goes left to right, the left side of the resistor is at a higher voltage, and the right side is at a lower voltage. The amount of voltage it will eat depends on the value of the resistor and the current flowing through it, and is given by V equals I times R. For example, if a 2 ampere current flows through a 5 ohms resistor, it will eat 5 times 2 or 10 volts. This means if the left side of the resistor has 12 volts, then the right side of the resistor after the drop will have 12 minus 10, or 2 volts. Also, if there is no resistor, then there will be no one to take the commission, and hence there will be no voltage drop. So, if this is 12 volts, then this will also be at 12 volts. Next thing to note is how resistors behave when they are connected in series and parallel. When resistors are in series, they are connected one after another, so the same current flows through each resistor without splitting. The total resistance in a series connection is found by simply adding up the resistance values of all the resistors. For example, if you have a battery of 30 volts and 3 resistors with resistance values of 3 ohms, 5 ohms, and 7 ohms connected in series across the
10 to
this voltage like this, then the total resistance would simply be 3 plus 5 plus 7, which equals 15 ohms. This means the circuit behaves like a single resistor of 15 ohms. The current can be found by dividing the total voltage by the total resistance, so 30 volts divided by 15 ohms, which equals 2 amps. Now this same current will flow through all these 3 resistors, so each resistor will have a voltage drop equal to the current multiplied by its resistance. This means the first resistor has a voltage drop of 2 amps times 3 ohms, which is 6 volts. The second resistor's voltage drop is 2 amps times 5 ohms, which is 10 volts. The third resistor's voltage drop is 2 amps times 7 ohms, which is 14 volts. So at this left side of 3 ohms we have 30 volts, and right side will have 30 minus 6 or 24 volts. Then, at the left side of the 5 ohms resistor, the voltage is 24 volts, and after it drops by 10 volts, the right side will have 24 minus 10 or 14 volts. Finally, at the left side of the 7 ohms resistor, the voltage is 14 volts, and after it drops by 14 volts, the right side will have 14 minus 14 or 0 volts. Next thing to note is how resistors behave when they are connected in parallel, where all the resistors are connected across the same 2 points, which means the left and right side of the resistors are connected to the same 2 points, and thus they will have the same voltage across them. However, the current splits up and flows through each resistor separately, depending on its resistance. Unlike series, the total resistance in parallel is found by using this formula. For example, if you have 3 resistors with resistance values of 2 ohms, 3 ohms, and 6 ohms connected in parallel, and a battery of 12 volts like this, then 1 over equivalent resistance R equals 1 over 3 plus 1 over 2 plus 1 over 6. This
Hoy, yung ano mo? What's up? Happened past there. Trying to get you out here, oh my oh, you out there. Popular siya. Kailan public sa ko. Galit talaga.
Resistor of 15 ohms. The current can be will have 24 minus 10 or 14 volts. Finally, at the left side of the 7 ohms resistor, 0 volts means the left and flows through each resistor separately, depending on its resistance. 1 over 3 plus 1 over 2 plus 1 over 6. This gives R equals 1 ohm. So what will be the value of this current? Equals 1 over 3 ohms and 6 ohms connected in parallel, and a battery of 12 volts like this. Then 1 over equivalent resistance R equals 1 over 3 plus 1 over 2 plus 1 over 6. This gives R equals 1 ohm. So what will be the value of this current? It will be 12 over 2 plus 1 over 6. This gives R equals 1 ohm. So what will be the value of this current? It will be 12 over 1 or 12 amperes. So now the main question is, how much current flows through each resistor? The voltage across each resistor is the same because they are connected in parallel, and that voltage is 12 volts. This means for this resistor, the voltage drop is 12 volts, and resistor value of 2 ohms. Therefore, current equals 12 divided by 2, which is 6 amperes. Similarly, for the 3 ohms resistor, current equals 12 divided by 3 or 4 amperes, and for the 6 ohms resistor, current equals 12 volts divided by 6 ohms.
What yung dumadaan? Tapos, pagdaan dito sa 2 ohm resistor, mababawasan siya ng 6 amperes.
Which is 2 amperes. If you add these currents together, 6 plus 4 plus 2, you get 12 amperes, which matches the total current flowing from the battery. This shows how the total current splits among the resistors in parallel, depending on their resistance. With this theory, you can now solve any complex circuit by breaking it down into simpler series and parallel parts. So, for our original question, the very first thing you should do is label all the points. Let us label this as A, then this point will have different voltage because of this resistor, which will drop the voltage of point A. So label this as B. Similarly, label this as C, then this as D, this as E. But wait, we don't have any resistor here, and thus there will be no voltage drop, which means both these points are the same. So keep it D only, and finally, this as E. After that, across the battery label, the voltage value is 0 on the negative terminal side, and at the positive terminal, label whatever voltage the battery is giving, which is 84 volts in our case. Now, here comes the trick. Imagine you cut the circuit from here and gently unfold it into a straight line. So what will you observe? This will be point A with voltage 84, and this will be point E with voltage 0. Now, after A, put all points from B to E like this, in a straight line. We have only this 1 ohm resistor between points A and B. So put it here like this. We have only this 15 ohm resistor between B and C. Then draw point D. We have this 9 ohm resistor between C and D. But we have an 8 ohm resistor between point B and D. So put it here. But that's not it. We have a 3 ohm resistor between point B and D. So put it here like this. Finally, we have a 4 ohm resistor between point D and E. This is how to put the circuit in a straight line. This visual trick helps you clearly see which resistors are in series and which are in parallel. Now, at each step, replace any group of resistors which are either in series or in parallel with their equivalent resistance. We first see that these two resistors are in series between points B and D, and their equivalent resistance will be 15 plus 9 or 24 ohms. What do you see next? Yes, right. These three resistors are in parallel, and we can find the equivalent resistance using 1 over R equals 1 over 3 plus 1 over 8 plus 1 over 24. This gives R equals 2 ohms. So make the equivalent 2.
Oh, man. Yeah? Tapos yung 5, tapos yung R.
Ohm resistor between B and D. Now, what can be said about these three resistors between A and E? Yes, right. They are in series. So their equivalent resistance will be 1 plus 2, or 4, or 7 ohms. Wow, nice. So what do you think will be the current that will flow through the battery now? Since we have the total voltage as 84 volts, and the total resistance as 7 ohms, the current will be 84 divided by 7, which is 12 amperes. Now, we will move in the reverse direction. Now, since all the three resistors between A and E are in series, this same 12 amperes will pass through each of them. What will be the voltage drop across this 1 ohm resistor? It will be 1 times 12 or 12 volts. So if voltage at point A is 84 volts, then the voltage at point B is 84 minus 12, or 72 volts. Now, what will be the voltage drop across this 2 ohms resistor or across BD? It will be 2 times 12 or 24 volts. So if voltage at point B is 72 volts, then the voltage at point D is 72 minus 24 or 48 volts. This means the voltage drop across this 4 ohms resistor is 48 volts. Now, let us move 1 more or 48 volts. So if voltage, what will be the voltage drop across this 2 ohms resistor or across BD? It will be 2 times 12 or 24 volts. So if voltage at point B is 72 volts, then the voltage at point D is 72 minus 24 or 48 volts. This means the voltage drop across this 4 ohms resistor is 48 volts. Now, let us move one more step backward. Break this 2 ohm resistor into the original 3 resistors, the 24 ohm, 8 ohm, and 3 ohm resistors, all connected in parallel between points B and D. Now that we have the voltage drop across BD as 24 volts, the voltage drop across each of the 3 resistors is the same 24 volts. Now, let's find the current through each resistor. For the 24 ohm resistor, the current is 24 divided by 24, which is 1 ampere. For the 8 ohm resistor, the current is 24 divided by 8, which is 3 amperes, and for the 3 ohm resistor, the current is 24 divided by 3, which is 8 amperes. So the total current flowing from B to D is 1 plus 3 plus 8, which is 12 amperes. Exactly what we had earlier when we replaced them with the equivalent 2 ohm E to D. The same 24 volt 3 resistor.
Para ng circuit, 72 divided by
The 24 ohm, 8 ohm, and 3 ohm resistors, all connected in parallel between points B and D. Now that we have the voltage drop across BD as 24 volts, the voltage drop across each of the 3 resistors is the same 24
3, 9.
volts. Now, let's find the current through each resistor. For the 24 ohm resistor, the current is 24 divided by 24, which is 1 ampere. For the 8 ohm resistor, the current is 24 divided by 8, which is 3 amperes, and for the 3 ohm resistor, the current is 24 for the current through each resistor. For the 24 ohm resistor, the current is 24 divided by 24, which is 1 ampere. For the 8 ohm resistor, the current is 24 divided by 8, which is 3 amperes, and for the 3 ohm resistor, the current is 24 divided by 3, which is 8 amperes. So the total current flowing from B to D by 24, which is 1. Now, let's find the current through each resistor. For the 24 ohm resistor, the 3 resistors parallel between points B and D. Now that we have the voltage, let's find the current through each resistor. For the 24 ohm resistor, the current is 24 divided by the 3 ohm resistor. The current is 24 divided by 3, which is 8 amperes. So the total current flowing from B to D is 1 plus 3 plus 8, which is 12 amperes. Exactly what we had earlier when we replaced them with the equivalent 2 ohm resistor. Finally, we can break this 24 ohm resistor back into the original 2 resistors, 15 ohms and 9 ohms, which were connected in series between points B and D through point C. Since they are in series, the same current of 1 amp flows through both. So finally, analyze them. The voltage drop across the 15 ohm resistor is 1 times 15, which is 15 volts. And the voltage drop across the 9 ohm resistor is 1 times 9, which is 9 volts. So starting from point B at 72 volts will be 57 minus 9, which is 48 volts, same as before. Everything is consistent. And finally, we will rebuild the circuit back to its original form. Look at this circuit closely. We have multiple resistors, multiple loops, and multiple voltage sources. Suppose we want to find
Okay. Dalawa yung battery.
the current passing through and voltage drop across each of these resistors. Then, what should we do? 2 laws that are fundamental and form the backbone of circuit analysis in this universe are Kirchhoff's current law, or KCL, which we also call as junction rule, and Kirchhoff's voltage law, or KVL, which we also call as loop rule. KCL says that the total current entering a junction or a node is equal to the total current leaving it, because charge cannot appear or disappear at a junction. And KVL says that the sum of all voltages around any closed loop in a circuit is 0 because the energy is conserved. As a first step, we choose a reference node, also called the ground, and we assume its voltage to be 0 volt. This node serves as the baseline, and all other node voltages will be measured with respect to it. For this case, let us select this node as 0 volts. Before we move further, always note that if we have a resistor and a current flows through it in this direction, then the resistor acts like a voltage eater, and this is called a voltage drop across the resistor. The voltage drops in the direction of the flow of the current. So to voltage, if a 2 ampere current flows at 15 minus 10 or 5, we have plus 17 volts.
17. 17 dadaan dito sa 1. Ayon sa law, 17 volts equals current. So 17. Stand siya dito. Dito? So, nagsama ba sila dito sa 4 volts ay ohms? Sige.
Then this node will be at 17 volts, right? Now, because of this resistor, there will be a voltage difference between these 2 nodes. Right now, we don't know this difference, and therefore, we will label this node with voltage as V sub A. Then we will label this node with voltage as V sub B. Now, if this is V sub B, so this will also be V sub B, because there is nothing here except wire, whose resistance is assumed to be 0. Then here we have plus 5 volts, and therefore this node will be at VB, plus 5 volts, right? Next, we apply KCL at each of the nodes that have unknown voltages. For that, assume there is some current that enters node A like this, and label it I1. The direction doesn't matter right now, because if the value comes out positive, the direction is correct. If it comes out negative, the actual direction will be opposite to this. Then a current going in this direction, like this, which we call I2, and finally another current I3 going in this branch, in this direction. Okay, KCL says that the total current entering a junction or a node is equal to the total current leaving it. So at this node, A, we have I1 equal to I2 plus I3, because I1 is entering the node, while both I2 and I3 are leaving it. We can rewrite it as I1 minus I2 minus I3 equals 0. Next, we will use KVL, or the loop rule, which says that the sum of all voltages around any closed loop in a circuit is 0. Let's label the loops first. We will call the left loop as loop 1 and the right loop as loop 2. Let us start from the bottom left corner of loop 1 and moving in a clockwise direction, we will add up all the voltage rises and drops we encounter and set their total equal to 0. So first, we have a voltage rise of 17, and thus we write plus 17 volts. Then because of this resistor, we have a voltage drop of I1 times 1 or I1, and thus write minus I1 here. Then because of this resistor, we have a voltage drop of I3 times 4, and thus write minus 4I3 here. Then finally, because of this resistor, we have a voltage drop of I1 times 2, and thus write minus 2I1 here, and set their total equal to 0. Both of them together will give minus 3 times I1. Now, take both of them here to get 3I1 plus 4I3 equals 17. Noise. Then let us move on to loop 2. You know what? We can start from any point and complete the loop. So let us start from node A and move in a clockwise direction. Now, because of this resistor, we have a voltage drop of I2 times 3, and thus write minus 3I2 here. Then notice here that as we move in this direction, the terminal is negative, which means a voltage drop of 5 volts, and hence write minus 5 here. Then, because of this resistor, we will have a voltage rise of I3 times 4, because notice that we are moving like this, and the current is in the opposite direction, and thus we get a rise in voltage. So, write plus 4 times I3 here, and set their total equal to 0. This way, we now have 3 unknowns, I1, I2, and I3 and 3 equations, and thus we can solve them easily to find all the currents. Awesome! Now I am in no mood to solve a system of 3 equations. You can do it easily. By the way, I have made a video on solving a system of equations using matrix inverse, and the link is in the description. See, that was a smooth promotion of my previous video. After solving this, we get I1 as 3 amps, I2 as 1 amp, and I3 as 2 amps. So, what will be the voltage drop across this 1 ohm resistor? It will be 1 times I1 or 3 volts, right? So this 17 volts minus the voltage at node A, or V sub A, will be equal to 3. Thus V sub A equals 14 volts. Then look here. The voltage at node A
14 volts.
node B, or V sub B, will be equal to 8. Thus, V sub B equals 6 volts. Now let me know in the comments, what will be the voltage drop across these 2 ohms and 3 ohms resistors? See how easy circuit analysis becomes with the help of KCL and KVL. And becoming a member. So good.
What? Nanonood na ako ng video. Hindi ko pa nagigets.
In this video, we're going to go over Kirchhoff's voltage law circuit to a low electric potential. The energy of the charges that are flowing in that circuit is actually being reduced. Energy is being
2 ohms.
transferred from the charges to the resistor. Reduce the energy per unit charge. And when you see this, it's because the battery is transferring to a high voltage. This energy is being from a high electric from positive. You know that current naturally flows from the direction of high potential to low potential in a resistor. So it flows from positive to negative. Now a resistor consumes energy. And anytime the current flows from a high electric potential to a low electric potential, the energy of the charges that are flowing in that circuit is actually being reduced. Energy is being transferred from the charges to the resistor. So therefore, because the resistor decreases the energy of the charges, we're going to assign a negative voltage to it because it reduces the energy per unit charge. And that's what a volt is. 1 volt is 1 joule per coulomb. So voltage is basically the energy change per unit charge, which is basically per 1 coulomb. Now a battery does something different. In a battery, current can flow from low potential to high potential. So this could be 0 volts and this could be 12. And when you see this, whenever the current is flowing from a low potential to a high potential, that means that the energy of the charges is increasing. And so this is going to create a positive voltage because the battery is transferring energy to the charges. And so it increases the voltage of the charges, but a resistor will decrease the voltage of the charges. Now let's see if you remember. So let's say if we have a resistor and the current is flowing in that direction, will we assign a positive voltage or negative voltage to the resistor? So keep this in mind, a resistor always creates a voltage drop. It always consumes energy from the charges. So always assign a negative V for resistor. Now if we have a battery that's listed this way, and there's a current flowing in this direction, this battery, is it increasing the energy of the charges or is it decreasing the energy of the charges? And compare it to this situation. So what if we reverse the polarity? And let's say the current is still flowing in the same direction. So which one should we assign a positive voltage and which one should we assign a negative voltage? Now keep this in mind, anytime
Positive. Right.
the current flows from, let me put that in blue, a high potential to a low potential, the energy of the charges is being reduced, so it's going to be a negative voltage. Now anytime it flows in the opposite direction, that is from a low potential to a high potential, then the voltage is increasing, the energy of the charges is increasing. So looking at this diagram, the current is flowing from positive to negative, so it's going from a high potential to a low potential. So this battery reduces the energy of the charges. Now for this one, it's going from low potential to a high potential, so it's increasing the energy of the charges. So we should assign a positive V to this value and a negative V to this battery. Now let's work on some practicing the energy of the charges.
What?
So let's say if we have a battery, the negative terminal, and let's say 10 ohms and 12 ohms. So this is R1, R2, R3. So write an expression that highlights Kirchhoff's voltage law. Show that the sum of the voltages around the circuit must add to 0. Now the current is going to leave the positive terminal of the battery, so it's going to be flowing in this direction. So as it flows through R1, the voltage will decrease. But the battery, notice that the current flows from the negative terminal to the positive terminal of the battery. So the battery supplies energy to the circuit. So I'm going to put positive VB for the voltage of the battery. And then negative V1, that's the voltage drop across R1. And R2 also creates a voltage drop. and R3 will also create a voltage drop. And based on Kirchhoff's voltage law, the sum of all the voltages in a circuit must add to 0. Now let's use that equation to calculate the current in a circuit. So the voltage of the battery is 12 volts. Now we know that V is equal to IR. And so the current is the same in the circuit because there's only one path for the current to flow, and so what we have is a series circuit. So V1 is going to be I times R1, and R1 is 8 ohms. So we can say that V1 is 8 times I. V2 is I times R2, or I times 10, so that's going to be 10 times I. V3 is going to be 12 times the current that flows through it, which is I. So now we can add these like terms. Negative 8 minus 10, that's negative 18, minus 12, that's negative 30. So this is going to be negative 30I. Now let's move this to that side, so we have 12V is equal to 30I, and then let's divide both sides by 30. So the current that flows in this circuit is 12 volts divided by 30 ohms, is I times to be I times R1, and R1 is 8 ohms. So we can say that V1 is 8 times I. V2 is I times R2, or I times 10, so that's going to be 10 times I. V3 is going to be 12 times the current that flows through it, which is I. So now we can add these like terms. Negative 8 minus 10, that's negative 18, minus 12, that's negative 30. So this is going to be negative 30I. Now let's move this to that side, so we have 12V is equal to 30I, and then let's divide both sides by 30. Oops. Now let's say the electric potential at this point is 0 volts. Let's calculate the electric potential at these points. So what is the electric potential at point A, B, and C? So notice that the potential difference of the battery is 12 volts. And so since this is a positive sign, A has to be higher than this point. So at point A, the voltage is, or the potential is 12 volts. Now what is the potential at point B? So we need to calculate the voltage drop across R1. So we can use V is equal to I1. So we have the current, which is 0.4 amps, and let's multiply by R1, which is 8. So 0.4 times 8 is 3.2. So the voltage is going to drop by 3.2. So if we take 12 volts and subtract it by 3.2, this will give us a potential of 8.8 volts at this point. Potential difference is equal to the current flowing through the resistor times the resistor itself. Now the change in the potential is VB minus VA. And with a resistor, we know that there's a voltage drop, so we need to put a negative sign. So this is going to be negative I times R1. So to calculate the potential at point B, it's going to be the potential at point A minus I times R1. So the potential at A is 12, and then subtract that by a current of 0.4 times a resistance of 8, and that will give you 8.8. Now let's do the same thing for point C. So we can start with this equation. Now this is going to be VC minus VB, and that's equal to negative I R2. So the potential at C is going to be the potential at B minus I R2. So at B is 8.8, and the current is 0.4, and R2 is 10. So if you type in 8.8 minus 0.4 times 10, this will give you 4.8 volts.
So, lahat ng resistance. So, 30.
You should get the difference between these two values. So 0.4 times 12 is 4.8, and that's the potential difference across R3. And so that's how you can solve this particular circuit using KVL, Kirchhoff's voltage law. Now let's work on another.
Okay, solve natin.
So here we have a 12 volt battery, and here we have an 8 volt battery. And go ahead and use.
Point one or well, maybe.
Now the 12 volt battery wants to send current in this direction, so that is the clockwise direction. And the 8 volt battery also wants to send current in the clockwise direction. So therefore, these two batteries, they don't oppose each other, they support each other, because they want to send current in the same direction. So now that we know the direction of the current, let's set up the equation. So let's call this VB1 and VB2. So the current flows from low potential to high potential for VB1. So therefore, VB1 increases the energy of the charges. So we're going to assign a positive voltage. The resistor consumes energy from the circuit, so we're going to assign that a negative voltage. So that's going to be so if the I, VB2 is positive 8.
Now naiintindihan. Lang pumapasok sa isip ko. Hindi ako makapag-practice. Sunod ako nanood ng video.
Talk to you about some basic supply, which means it's actually we have a current flowing through that resistor, which is I, that develops a voltage across it, which we'll call V. Ohm's law simply states that the voltage across that resistor is equal to this current I times that resistance R. All right. Now, look, just a couple of things to think about here, and really this is, I guess, a bit of a discussion on what I'm calling defined directions, okay? let's imagine I have a resistor sitting here, okay? And if I actually define the direction of that current I, to label my voltage to be consistent with that defined direction, I'll label it as plus, minus, and I'm going to call that V, all right? So in other words, this current is flowing from a high to a low. So in other words, let's take another example. Let's say I have a resistance here. Let's say the current is flowing in this direction. Once again, we're going to call it I. How would I label my voltage across that component, that resistor? Well,
Minutes na? 30 minutes na? 50 minutes na yun? Okay. After nito, gawa tayo practice question. Tapos, so, tayo ng so, practice. Paano pag-practice hindi ka naman get?
I'm going to call it V. Now, if I actually maintain that consistency throughout of a lot of law, another law which I'd like to talk to you a little bit about is, and we'll look at some examples here, is what is called Kirchhoff. Look at the spelling here. Kirchhoff's voltage, V-I-L-T-A-G-E, voltage law. All right. Now, what does Kirchhoff's voltage law state? It really says the sum of the voltages around a loop is equal to 0. All right, let's take an example to show that. So supposing I had a voltage source here, we'll say that's 20 volts, and we'll put a couple of resistors in here, like this. I've got another voltage source sitting over here, and I'm going to say this guy maybe 15 volts. So there's my little circuit. I'm going to call this resistor, I'll put a value in here. Let's say it's a 1K resistor. Let's say that's a 2K resistor. All right. What about my defined current direction? Well, it's arbitrary in a way. You can choose it to go this way, you can choose it to go the other way. Does that mean that the actual current is going in that direction? Not necessarily. If I define the current direction, for example, going, let's say, this way, I'll just call it I, it may turn out that that current is a negative number, which means that the current really was going the other way around. Would I change anything? Absolutely not. I would just simply record that I is equal to some negative number. All right, so let's define the current in that direction. Label my voltages here. All right, let's do that. So I've got a voltage, what? Plus, minus. I'm going to call that voltage, let's say, V1. Okay, current flows along in this direction. Plus, minus, I'm going to call that voltage, let us say, V2. Okay, so I've got my labeling now of that voltage consistent with the way I actually define that current. All right, so then what we'll do is we'll apply Kirchhoff's voltage law, and we're going to sum these voltages around the loop. Does it matter which way I go around the loop? Absolutely not. Really doesn't matter. I can go clockwise, anti-clockwise, doesn't matter. All right, well, let's go clockwise. There we go. Let's have a starting point. Let's start here. Now, another little convention is if I'm traveling around the loop and I go up in voltage, I'm going to call that guy positive. If I drop in voltage, I'm going to call it negative. Okay? So here we go. I'm going from a minus to a plus. I'm going up in voltage. It's like going uphill, we'll call it positive. I'm going to say that's a 20. Next voltage, that's a minus to a plus. I'm going up. I'm going to call that a plus V2. As I come around the loop, next voltage, minus to a plus, I'm going to call that a plus V1. Continuing on around the loop, I go from a minus to a plus, and I call that plus 15. I've now completed my loop, and I'm going to sum that to 0. Okay? All right, well, what about V1 and V2? Well, look, let's use Ohm's law to evaluate V1 and V2. Well, that would simply say that V1 is equal to what? I times 2K. V2 is going to be I times 1K. So let's do that. So that's 20 plus V2. Well, that's I, isn't it? So there's I times 2K. Plus V1, which is I times what? The 1K. So that's I times 1K. Plus the 15, and all of that is equal to 0. All right, so now what should we do? Well, we should basically get all our terms together, shouldn't we? Yes, we should. So, well, we have 1I times 3K, all of that is equal to 0. Okay, let's take to I times 3K, but it's a minus, isn't it? And so therefore, what is I? I can now say I, and I think that's obvious, is equal to what? It's equal to a minus 35, and that's divided by 3k. Notice in this particular example that because of the direction that we defined I has come out to be a negative number. Now, I wouldn't change anything. I'm not going to go back and suddenly say, oh, I need to draw the current, the other minus. So if I wanted to figure out what V1 was, V1, of course, is just I times 2k. If I wanted to figure out V2, it's just simply I times the 1.
Hindi ako mapag-commentate sa kailangan, pero yan ba siya? Hantok talaga ako kung nakatulog. It's my fault. Buksan natin ito. If magigets ko to, probably.
1k.
Probably.
Law. All right, so what we've got
Kirchhoff's current law is about lahat ng voltage ay ng lahat ng currents is equal to 12 volts. Huh?
What is a resistor, let's say, connected here, a resistor connected here, and maybe a resistor connected over here like so. All right, so let's define a current direction I1 here. Let's say we've got a current I2 coming in here, and let's say we've got another current I3 coming in here. Well, Kirchhoff's current law simply states that, as I said before, the sum of the currents entering this node is equal to 0. All right, so a little convention. If the current's going into the node, we're going to call it positive. If it's going out of the node, we're going to call it negative. So this is going in. So we've got what? I1, positive. This is going in, plus I2. This is going in, plus I3. And all of that is equal to 0. All right. So what I want to do now is take a little problem, a little example that perhaps uses basically Kirchhoff's voltage law, current law, and also Ohm's law. So here we go with a little problem. All right, so I'll draw this for you. We'll make it up as we go along here. So I'm going to say, look, I've got a 20 volt source sitting here like so. All right, I've got a resistor here, which I'll call 1K. Another resistor sitting over here, we'll make that a 3K resistor. And another resistor over here, I'm going to call that 2K. And I've got a voltage source, let's say, sitting over here like so. That will be the circuit that we're going to deal with. All right. Okay, let's make this guy over here, let's make it 10 volts. All right. Now, it could be that you're asked to determine maybe the current in the 1K, or the current in the 3K, or the current in the 2K, or the voltage across the 3K, etc. So we really need to find out basically what's going on, what the currents are, etc. So we need to define current directions. As I say, that is arbitrary, really. I don't need to stress about it, thinking about which way the real current is going, the actual current direction is. Don't need to do that. So I'm going to define this current here as my I1 current. I'm going to define this current over here as my I2 current, and I'm going to say I3 is flowing in this direction like so. These are the defined current directions. First step. I'm going to label my voltages now to be consistent with that defined direction. So what have I got here? Well, I've got a plus minus. That would be my voltage across that resistor. I could label it, could call it V1 if we want to, or I could just leave it plus minus. So we know V1 would be I1 times 1K. My defined voltage direction across that 3K is plus minus. And a current going in this direction, so I've got a plus minus labeling of voltage there. Okay, so what are we trying to solve? We've got a node sitting here. Maybe we're trying to solve for those currents. Okay, what can we do? Well, we can take a loop here. Okay, I'm going to say that's loop number 1. Okay, and we're going to sum the voltages around that particular loop. All right, let's go for it. Does it matter which way around the loop? No, it doesn't. So, all right, I'm just going to go clockwise around that loop. I'm going to start at this point and simply go around summing those voltages. And I'm going to, as I say, take a step here and say, I know that voltage. Ohm's law says it's I1 times 1K. So here we go, starting here. So what have I got? I've got going up in voltage. I've got a 20, haven't I? As I come across here, I'm going from a minus to a plus to a minus. I'm dropping in voltage. So that's really a minus I1 times 1k. Continuing on, I'm dropping again, plus to a minus, so that is a minus, this time it's what, an I3 times the 3k, back to the beginning, all of that is equal to 0. Okay, that's one equation, two unknowns. All right, we can take another loop over here. Does it matter which way around the loop we go? No, it really doesn't. So we can go this way. So that's my loop 2, if you like. So let's do it. We'll start maybe here. We're going this way. So we're going from what, a plus to a minus. So that's really a minus 10, isn't it? Yep. As I come around my loop, I'm going from a plus to a minus. That means I'm dropping. That's a minus what? I2 times the 2k. And as I continue on round, I'm going from a plus to a minus now, am I not? Plus to a minus. I'm dropping again, so that's a minus what? I3 times that 3k, and all of that is equal to 0. So I've now got two equations. There are three unknowns, okay? The three currents. So where do I get my third equation from? Well, I'm going to get it now really from that node. And I1 is plus I2. I3 is going out, so that's a minus I3, and all of that is equal to 0. So I now have three equations with three unknowns, and I'm now really in a position to start solving for those unknowns.
For Ohm's law diagram. Bro, and ECP. 4 volts. Okay. 80. 1 is 3 amperes. 2 is 10 volts. Wait. Supplies 80 volts. Just well, 80. Or flashlight draws 0.25 amperes. Ang dali. Ang lahat. No. 0.25 amperes. 36 ohms. There. Resistance. 6 amperes. Or well, machine voltage. The voltage, the current will increase. Okay, wow, 3A. Tama. Ito. Uh, 4 volts. Ano, super negative volts. Bakit? Ba't sinagot ko 12 volts? So, 2 hours na. Re-record na.
Ngayon pa lang nag-start, yung sabihin.
Hindi, yun na po. Ano nga ako ba?
Kailangan mo provide note. Mami! Pag di siya nagpasa for 2 hours, kailangan mo provide note.
Tama. Tama. 18. second scale. For amps. 736 ohms, 6 amperes. 24 ohms. Mali. Kasi binara daw current daw po. So tama pala. Ohm's law practice problems. May diagram sana. Wait, diagram. Ito na lang. Dali na lang ito. 600 ohms na current. Kailan resistance. Practice question. Kasi nag- Pwede ka na yan. So, may Ah, circuit. Temperature. Well, I am glad and I hope for suck. Wala wipat. ba yung sinesearch mo? Tutulog kami.
We're setting your unilateral actions, drag the party's name through the mud. Every single one of you is living this like a bunch of cowards. I've never seen such mindless
Hindi na may table ko ah.
I'm the Director General of the Bureau of Intelligence. It's my job to work against this out. I will not rest until every traitor is rotting in the ground. So just stay out of my way.
Bukas nga eh. Bakit hindi talaga tapos? Sinipit ako sa 2 hours.
Nag-record ka hanggang ngayon. Basa ba yun?
Yes.
Yes.
Practice nga ako eh.
Habang naglalakad,
Ano ba nag-record? Ngayon hindi kasi. 5 minutes lang naman yun.
ba't ka pa salita ng salita?
Search na ako.
Kala ko ba nagpa-practice ka? Ano sa search?
Nasa-search ako ng practice problems.
Kala ko nakakita ka na ng... Wow, hindi talaga. Ay mo kanina, nag-search na ako ng practice problem. Sige, mag-search ka ulit? Mamaya search ka ulit.
Ohm's law nga. Kailangan yung circuit diagram.
Ano naman?
Nahanap ko yun. Wala akong makita. Kaya ChatGPT
Kala ko nga, nag-search ka na.
Na, mamaya ka.
Hindi ka, ano?
Director General, and you're barging in.
You're under arrest for reactionary counter-revolutionary activities.
What?
Take the traitor.
For a long journey. So I should put my coat on, should not.
No. Huli agad.
Kirk.
Ay, baril din dun. Ano to?
To be racing to get a defector like me to a safe house or something? Hey, come on. Why are you looking at me like I shot your dog? Look, as soon as they knew I had defeated North, the Southern authorities welcomed me. Open arms. Especially because of who I am as Director General. I know everything about the Republic's missiles. All that information only exists in here.
Hindi na makakalabas ng North Korea.
Your job and get me to safety.
Hindi ginawa niya mali. Hindi mo muna. Ang nakakaalam mo. Ang posibleng walang ano, Mossad, walang CIA, James. Nakatakas yung ano, Director General ng North Korea, papuntang South. Delegation ng ganito yan.
I go up in voltage, I'm going to call that guy.
Pumunta pa sa Trump. Hindi pumunta yun. China ang anong pupunta.
In this video, we're going to talk about how to solve any type of series parallel combination circuit like this one. Now, the first thing you want to do is you want to calculate the equivalent resistance. So notice that these three resistors are in series with each other. And so the equivalent resistance of those three is going to be 5 plus 3 plus 2, which is 10. So we can replace those three resistors with a single 10 ohm resistor. Now every other part of the circuit is going to remain the same initially. So this is 10 ohms. And this is still 10, this is still 5, and that's still 10. Now notice that we have two resistors in parallel. They're directly across from each other, and they have the same resistance. Whenever you have two parallel resistors with the same value, the equivalent resistance is simply half of that value. So individually they're both 10, so the equivalent resistance is going to be 5.
Tell me if he's alive or not.
So we can get rid of this. And replace it with a 5 ohm resistor. So now these three are in series with each other. So then we could just add them. 10 plus 5 plus 5 is from the battery. Rearrange this equation, total resistance, or the equivalent resistance. So the voltage of the battery is 60 volts in this example, and the equivalent resistance is 20 ohms. So 60 divided by 20. Now let's call this position.
Okay na. Okay, bis ka na.
Ikaw na! Tapos mo yan! Tulog na nga ako, di na dapat ako nandito. Kanina pa ako.
A. And let's
Pag-uusap sa akin, pwedeng i-pause. Pag-uusap hindi.
Oh, dali mo doon.
Yan mo na!
Hindi yun.
Sabi naman dito, ito yung hinahin. Ako, mga damit ko dito lang nilagay. Ayusin mo. Kaya nga, nasa upuan na nga eh. Ibig sabihin, hindi ko na-respect. Pwede eh. Kahit nakalagay sa upuan eh.
The drive down here was really long. I think I need to get some shut Okay.
Talking about General Yukio after your comrades were going down. The Director General was removed, and of course, the Yukio took his place.
Don't worry, Dad. It's already really. I'll be showing great while you're gone.
If you succeed in this mission, I swear I will not only set you free again, I'll give you your identity. Your daughter, too. The North Korean delegation will stay on this floor. The entire resort will be cleared out during their business runs.
Looking at it now, the facilities look good. But I wanted to ask, why did you choose this resort out of all places? It's pretty far from the venue.
Given their request, this was the obvious choice. As was usually not possible, as civilian access has to be strictly controlled. Finally, no buildings in 2-kilometer radius could be taller than
They can be particular, right? No, where exactly is this way, sir?
nowadays. No matter what I do, anger keeps me awake. When I think about the humiliation I went through as that master, I'm only thinking all this is already set down.
Hello.
I'm already prepared for plan. Please have mind.
Sabihin ko ng 10 minutes.
Former agent was a top
So, 9:40 matatapos.
He's been hiding his head for years.
This is B, C, D, E, and F. Now, in order to calculate the current that's flowing through each resistor, it's helpful to know the potential at each of these points. And we're going to say at point A, the potential is 0 volts. So now, if we travel in this direction from A to B, we're going towards the positive terminal of the battery. And the battery increases the energy of the circuit because it delivers power to the circuit. So as we go from A to B, it's going to be a voltage lift of 60 volts. So the potential at B is 60 volts. Now, something else they need to know is that whenever a current flows through a resistor, the current flows from a high potential to a low potential. So we have the current of 3 amps, it's flowing through the 10 ohm resistor. So let's call that just 3 amps. So that means this is positive and this is negative. So C is at a lower potential than B. So to calculate the potential at C, it's going to be the potential at B minus IR, because C is lower than B. So the potential at B is 60 volts. The current flowing through the 10 ohm resistor is 3 amps multiplied by 10. So 3 times 10 is a voltage drop of 30. And then 60 minus 30 tells us that the potential at C is 30 volts. Resistor. Because this path here, they're all in series. Whenever there's only a single path for the current to flow, you have a series path, and the current flowing through that path is the same everywhere along that path. So what this tells us is that 3 amps of current flows through the 5 ohm resistor. And current always flows from a high potential to a low potential. So as we travel from A to F, that's going to be a voltage lift because we're going from the negative side to the positive side. So anytime you go against the current, the potential decreased. So to calculate the potential at F, it's going to be the potential at A plus IR because we're going towards a higher potential. So this is going to be plus instead of minus. So the potential at A is 0. The current flowing through the 5 ohm resistor is 3 amps times 5. So the potential at F is going to be 15 volts. Now let's get rid of this because we now flowing through that resistor times resistance. The difference between 2 points. So we know that the current is flowing in this direction, and also current flows from a high potential to a low potential. So the potential at C is higher than the potential at A. So the voltage across that resistor is going to be the potential at C minus the potential at F, and that's equal to the current times the resistance. So the potential at C is 30, but the across that resistor. You can calculate the current that flows through the other branch.
30 volts to, so but 15 D. D is 15. 15 volts. 15 volts?
So let's focus on junction C. At that junction, we have a current of 3 amps that is entering the junction, and 1.5 amps of
Sige.
across the current flow. We know that the current is flowing in this direction, and also current flows from a high potential to a low potential. So the potential at C is higher than the potential at A. So the voltage across that resistor is going to be the potential at C minus the potential at F.
Okay. So, pagka-intindi ko, 60 volts, so magiging 30 volts. Tapos 30 volts, dadaan pababa, magiging,
And that's equal to the current times the resistance. And we don't know the current yet, but the resistance is 10. So 30 minus 15 will give us a voltage of 15 volts across that resistor. And so 15 divided by 10
1.5.
is 1.5. So that's the current that flows through the 5 ohm resistor. So now we could calculate the current that flows through the other branch. So let's focus on junction C. At that junction, we 5 amps, is junction rule. The total current that enters, call this I1 and this I2, then this must be I3. And
Yeah. Tahan. Oh.
quarter pa yung nakalagay. Mesh nakalagay. C yan yan. Earth and Life Science. B yan yan. General Physics 2. General Earth Science. General. Nasaan General Physics 1? Chemistry. General. Chemistry. Wait lang.
Chairman Johnson, he provided key accommodations. He wants to help with the joint project too, and he's very enthusiastic about it.
Yes.
A lot I'm excited about. It's hard to welcome you. We haven't even officially started the talks yet. Let's discuss that later. Right. I got it.
So I1 plus, so I3 is 3 minus 1.5. So this is also 1.5 amps. So now we have the current flowing through the remaining 3 resistors. So I'm just going to put it here, 1.5 amps.
Hello?
I can't stand those son of rats. Cracking up fucking shot master. Excuse me. But I have a moment of time.
So I1 is 3 amps, I2 is 1.5, so I3 is 3 minus 1.5. So through the remaining. Now, since the current potential, then D, then F. Now let's calculate the electric potential at point D. So the potential at point D is going to be the potential at point C minus IR, because begin with a circuit.
These are parallel and series circuits. The difference here's how to interpret series circuits. Here's how it goes. All components are lined up in a row. In parallel, there's some advances. Components are on multiple branches for current and voltage. You need to know how this affects them, so let me show. These are parallel and series. These are parallel and series circuits. The difference here's These are parallel and series circuits. The difference here's how to interpret series circuits. Here's how it goes. All components are lined up in a row. In parallel, there's some advances. Components are on multiple branches for current and voltage. You need to know how this affects them, so let me show. One wire, one so one, switching to bulbs. The current's the same in each one as it flows, but parallel's not the same. Current is shared like a second name. Voltage in series is shared. Parallel voltage is not. That's why when comparing the circuits, parallel gets as bright as it got. These are parallel and series circuits. The
30 seconds done, but di mo siya. Hindi ko na siya nag-gets. Gusto ko kasi yung may... Pag taas yung resistance, yung current bababa. Pag tataas yung voltage, sa taas din yung current. One more.
In this video, I will teach you about Ohm's law. So basically,
Hello everyone, I'm Jesse Mason, and in this Teach Me video, we'll analyze a combination resistive circuit configurations. Together, we'll determine the this problem is to draw a picture. But with the circuit already drawn, we just need to apply a few labels. We'll label the positive and negative side of the battery, as well as the junctions. And if we had more room on the circuit diagram, we'd also label the unknown currents, but we'll come back to those in a little bit. Now, before we take a crack at this circuit, I recommend that we replace this empty leg with a dummy resistor, a 0 ohm placeholder that will make our analysis a little simpler. This step isn't necessary for seasoned veterans of circuit analysis, but I find it to be helpful for beginners. Alright, to analyze a combination circuit, we'll use what I call the break it down, build it up method. We'll break the circuit down piece by piece, determining equivalent resistances until we have a single equivalent resistance for the entire circuit. Then, we'll build it back up piece by piece using Ohm's law until the voltage across and current through each resistor has been determined. Okay, let's break it down now. We'll start by redrawing the circuit so that series and parallel relationships are readily apparent. We'll write first redraw because there will be quite a few. The basic idea for our first redraw is to convert our circuit diagram, which has kind of this loopy current path, clockwise from positive to negative, into a unidirectional one, left to right. I find it useful to imagine grabbing the positive side of the battery with your left hand and the negative side with your right, then breaking the battery apart and stretching the circuit out onto the page below. So we put the positive side of the battery here on the left and translate the rest of the circuit. After leaving the positive side of the battery, the current encounters the 100 ohm resistor first, so we'll write that here. And thereafter, the current encounters junction 1. There's a three-way split at junction 1, which means these legs are in parallel, so we'll draw them geometrically parallel below. So this top leg has a 50 ohm resistor, and a 250 ohm resistor follows it, so they're in series. And the top leg terminates right here, at junction 2. There's another leg that begins at junction 1 and terminates at junction 2, and it comprises this devilish diagonal resistor. Despite its menacing appearance, this resistor is just connected in parallel with the top leg, so we'll draw it simply
300 ohms, tapos 200 ohms.
spanning the gap between the two junctions below. After junction 2, we have this bottom leg with our 0 ohm resistor. We'll put that to the right of junction 2 here. And then we get to junction 3. Between junction 1 and junction 3 is a single 300 ohm resistor, so it is in parallel with the 4 previously drawn resistors. We'll depict this by dangling one long leg from junction 1 and junction 3. Finally, following junction 3, we have a single 150 ohm resistor leading us home to the negative side of the battery. So we draw the 150 ohm resistor here, and finish with the negative side of the battery on the right. And that, my friends, is our first redraw. You can see what I meant by breaking the circuit apart and stretching it onto the page. Now we can easily determine our first equivalent resistance. We'll start with the resistors that are furthest from the battery and determine their equivalent resistance. So, working inward from the positive and negative sides, we find that the 50 and 250 ohm resistors fit the bill. If you're ever unsure where to start, resistors in series are always a good bet. So the equivalent resistance for ohms. Individual resistances. Higher circuit ohm resistor into the circuit diagram and determine the resistors furthest from the battery. Moving inward from the sides of the battery, we find that these two resistors are the next to be combined. We calculate their equivalent resistance differently because they're not in series, but in parallel with one another. So for our 300 and 200 ohm resistors, Req equals 1 divided by 1 over 300 ohms plus 1 over 200 ohms, which equals 120 ohms. So for resistors in parallel, the equivalent resistance is equal to the reciprocal of the sum of the reciprocals. Okay, moving on to our third redraw. Here we'll have the same circuit as depicted in the second redraw, except that we replace the 300 and 200 ohm resistors with their resistive equivalent, a single 120 ohm resistor. Starting to get the hang of this? If not, don't panic. We've got a couple more redraws with which to practice before we're done breaking it down. So, which resistors are next? You guessed it, the two that are in series. So we just add their resistances, and 2 will not be present in our fourth resistors with their resistive equivalent, and perhaps right here. So for their equivalent resistance, we'll have 1 over 120 ohms plus 1 over 300 ohms, which yields 86 ohms. Again, we redraw the circuit, this time replacing the two parallel resistors between junction 1 and junction 3 with our 86 ohm resistor. This redraw leaves us with 3 resistors to combine. They're in series, so we just sum their resistances, which yields an equivalent resistance of 336 ohms. Which brings us to our final redraw. Means we're done breaking it down. If we bend our circuit back together, reconnecting the positive and negative sides of the battery, it should be clear that we're left with our old ohmic friend, the simple circuit. And as far as the battery is concerned, that's all there ever was. No matter the circuit's configuration, the battery only sees an equivalent resistance and supplies the circuit with a corresponding current. How the circuit divvies up this current depends on the configuration. So we'll label the current leaving and re-entering the battery as I0. See, I told you we'd come back to drawing our currents. And now we'll determine a value for I0 using Ohm's law. We write V equals IR, which will solve for I, which in this situation gives us I0 equals the source voltage divided by the equivalent resistance. Inserting our values, a value for current leaving and re-entering the battery marks the halfway point in our analysis, which means it's time to build it up now. To build our circuit back up to its original configuration, we'll move through our series of redraws in retrograde, determining the values for voltage across and current through each resistor as we go. So we begin building it up by revisiting our fifth redraw. By the way, I'm redrawing my redraws here, hence the little 2, for the sake of neatness. But to save on time and paper at home, just simply mark up your old redraws. Okay, we know that I0 passes through the resistor, representing the equivalent resistance of these 3 resistors. And since there's only one path for the current, we know that I0 must pass through each of the 3 resistors. In other words, series resistors experience the same current, but provided the resistance values differ, they experience different voltages. Knowing the current through the resistors, we can now determine the voltage across them using Ohm's law. So, Ohm resistor equals the current through the resistor, which is I0, that's 0.054 amperes, times the resistance of the resistor, which is of course 100 ohms. This yields a voltage resistor. V equals I, that's 0.054 amps, times R, 86 ohms, which equals 4.6 volts. And for the 150 ohm resistor, 0.054 amps times 150 ohms, which equals 8.1 volts. Now at this point, we could determine the power dissipation for the 2 outer resistors, but we'll just wait to calculate power until the end of the problem when we tabulate our solutions. Circuit junctions, where 3 or more paths come together. Here we have I0 splitting up into 2 currents at junction 1. What do we know about resistors in parallel? Well, we know they'll have the same voltage, but so long as they have differing resistances, they'll have different currents. And so we'll label the currents here I1 and I2. To determine values for I1 and I2, we'll use Ohm's law. But first we need voltages for these two resistors. We know that the voltage drop across the 86 ohm resistor is 4.6 volts, and since it represents parallel resistors, that means the voltage drop across each resistor is the same, 4.6 volts. And we'll box up this result to save for our solutions table. Solving Ohm's law for current, we determined that the current through the 120 ohm resistor, that is to say I1, equals 0.038 amps. Similar calculation for the 300 ohm resistor yields a value of 0.015 amps for I2. Now to our third redraw. Here the 120 ohm resistor expands and I0 doesn't change. I1 passes through both. We'll run the calculations for the sake of posterity with the unsurprising result that the voltage drop over the 0 ohm resistor is 0 volts. Onward and upward, or circuit, which means we need additional currents between the 300 ohm and 200 ohm resistors here. So we'll call this one I3 and this one I4. To get values for I3 and I4, we'll use, you guessed it, Ohm's law. We need voltages first, but because they're in parallel, they have identical voltages to the resistor representing their equivalent resistance. That's 4.6 volts. We'll box that up for the 200 ohm resistor, and we determine current values using this voltage. So I3 is 0.015 amps, and I4 is 0.023 amps. Got the hang of this? Good. Yes. Now back to our first redraw. By the way, you'll likely be studying circuits with multiple power sources soon. And when you do, you'll need another circuit analysis tool, namely Kirchhoff's rules. Subscribe to my channel now, and when you need help with Kirchhoff's, come on back. Okay, I0 hasn't changed, so we'll draw that first. The current through this top leg containing the 50 ohm and 250 ohm resistors, that's I3 here. And the 200 ohm resistor is associated with I4. The current through the bottom leg, that's I2. And it looks like we forgot to label the current through the dummy resistor in our last redraw. That's just I1. So the final pieces of our circuit puzzle are the voltages across the 50 ohm and 250 ohm resistors. Again, 1.5 amps, which yields a voltage of 50 ohm resistor. With volt power dissipation for 0.75 volts and 0.015 amps, and we get 11 mil.
So, dahil dito, 18 volts. Gets, 18 volts. Ito. Dito. 18 divided by 100. 0.18 amperes current natin. Kasi series siya. So kapag series, same current. Wait, pwede bang ganun siya tapos? Hindi eh. Ito para ito, tapos ito, dalawang
kilowatts for the 50 ohm resistor. For the 100 ohm resistor, we multiply 5.4 volts and 0.054 amps, and we get 0.292 watts. We'll fill in the table for the other resistors, collecting solutions from our redraws, and determining power dissipation as we go. And that is how you break it down and build it up. I'm Jesse Mason. Mason, I hope this True Teach Me video. As always, happy learning.
Huh? The Odyssey. Yung bago ni Christopher Nolan. Yung gumawa ng Batman. And then sino ba cast?
Hindi mo lang hinugasan mo kinainan.
Kumain ba siya? Ano kinain niya? Ito nag-butter, coffee.
Kumain lang, basta.
Sweet versus velocity.
Wala namang ginagawa.
Hello, this is Jesse Mason from Teach Me in today's popular vernacular, but in this we'll delineate Sydney, as in many other cities in the States now, a yearly running event is held, titled the Color Run. The Color Run is aptly billed as the happiest 5K on the planet, and if you've ever attended a Color Run, then you know what they're talking about. Color runners leave the starting line in an old part of Ypsi known as Depot Town and proceed to jog around the city in a jagged loop. First they head east for a block, then north for a few blocks, and then they turn west. At this point, the runners celebrate the completion of their first kilometer by getting doused with colored cornstarch. Now, typically people dislike getting stuff thrown in their faces, but at the Color Run, it's literally a rite of passage. Next, the runners turn north for a few blocks, hit the second so-called kilometer color zone, where another monochromatic dousing ensues, before turning south and jogging along my alma mater, Eastern Michigan University. After a few blocks, the color runners turn west and jog past the dorm where I met the woman of my dreams. Then they head south, then east, through another kilometer color zone, before heading south again. Unbeknownst to runners, the next turn puts them on an ancient mastodon trail, now paved, populated, and pronounced Michigan Avenue. Runners turn north off of Michigan Ave, hit their last kilometer color zone, then proceed for several blocks before their final turn, which leads them down to a riverside park. Here, instead of a 5th kilometer color zone, runners are treated to a massive dance party, where, of course, colored cornstarch is peppered on them like confetti. And that is the Color Run. So, we're going to determine a particular runner's average speed and average velocity for their run, but before we do so, we need to understand the difference between two more fundamental quantities, distance and displacement. Distance is simply the odometer. Now, participants from final distance, d sub f, equals 5,000 meters. Of course, if the final distance is 5,000 meters, that would imply that the initial distance, d sub I, is 0 meters. Implicit in these distances is the location of our origin, the starting line. We'll mark that on our map. And while we're at it, we'll indicate our coordinate system for the map, which is to say, we'll mark the direction of north.
Mami! Nasaan yung unan kong kulay white? Yung unan kong kulay white, yung body pillow. Mami.
Hello, this is Jesse Mason from Teach Me with speed versus velocity. They have different, and of course more precise, meanings. The path traveled by the race's participants from starting line to finish line is 5 kilometers. Displacement is defined as a change in position. Change in position relative to what? Well, relative to our origin, of course. So what is the initial displacement? Again, because our initial position coincides with the origin, the initial displacement is 0. So S sub I equals 0 meters. Don't worry about that tiny arrow over the S. We'll get to that in just a moment. Now, how about our runner's final displacement? Well, the final change in position of our runner relative to the origin would be the length of a straight line drawn from the origin to our runner's final position, the finish line. We'll draw an arrow from the origin to the final position to represent final displacement, S sub f. The length of this displacement is about a quarter kilometer, so we'll write S sub f equals 250 meters, SW, which stands for southwest. This last part, the direction, is a critical difference between distance and displacement. You see, displacement is what we call a vector quantity. A vector quantity is a quantity endowed with both magnitude, in this case 250 meters, and direction, in this case southwest of the origin. We indicate a vector quantity graphically by drawing an arrow, the length of which represents the magnitude of the vector. A vector is indicated mathematically, you guessed it, by drawing a tiny arrow above the variable representing the vector. Distance, on the other hand, is not a vector quantity because it lacks directional information. Distance is what we call a scalar quantity, a quantity describing magnitude only. Great. Now we can turn our attention to speed and velocity. Let's suppose that our runner leaves the starting line, traveling eastward at a couple meters per second. We'll indicate this motion with an arrow. This arrow, like the displacement arrow drawn in green, is a vector arrow, and it represents the magnitude and direction of the runner's instantaneous velocity, or velocity at that instant. Since the magnitude and direction of the runner's instantaneous velocity change throughout the race, we'll traverse the course indicating different velocities for the runner. Notice that the second velocity vector arrow is shorter than the first. This implies that the runner is moving more slowly at the second position. So we'll indicate a velocity here and here. Of course, there's an infinite number of velocity vectors we could indicate. We're just drawing a few. And maybe our runner is getting tired after the first couple clicks, is beginning to slow, so shorter vector arrows. Maybe even comes to a halt at the 4th kilometer color zone to rest, replenish some electrolytes, clean the cornstarch out of their ears, and runner goes on to complete the race with a finishing time of, let's say 1 hour. Now we can determine average velocity. The average velocity of a body is defined as the change in the body's displacement, delta S, divided by the change in time, delta T. Expanding, we get S sub F minus S sub I over T sub F minus T sub I. Here the initial displacement is 0, so we can set this value to 0. And almost always the clock starts at 0. Here it's implied by our final time of 1 hour, so we can set T sub I to 0. Good. Now we'll insert our values for S sub F and T sub F. So for S sub F we have 250 meters southwest, don't forget the direction, and we'll convert 1 hour to 3,600 seconds for T sub F. This puts our velocity in the preferred SI units. So, this implies that our runner's average velocity
Hello everyone, I'm Jesse Mason, and for this edition of Teach Me, we're going to use Kirchhoff's rules to analyze a circuit. Specifically, we're going to determine the current through, the voltage across, and the power dissipated by the 2 resistors that you see here. As always, when using Kirchhoff's rules, we're going to start by labeling our junctions. I'm going to label mine J1 and J2. Next, we label our currents. I'm going to label this current I0. After junction 1, I'll have I1 on the right leg. Note that I0 does not pass through junction 1. This middle leg will be I2. And when I1 and I2 rejoin, we have I0, because the current coming out of that 1.5 volt battery needs to be the current coming back in. Also note that the directions of these currents at this point are arbitrary. We'll find out if we chose the right directions after we complete the problem. Next, we label our loops. I'll label this loop A and this loop B. Just like the currents, the direction of your loops is arbitrary. And you can label this outer perimeter loop C if you'd like. I'm not going to. I anticipate we won't need it. Now that we've labeled our circuit, we're going to apply the junction rule. The junction rule states that the sum of the currents into a junction is equal to the sum of the currents out of a junction. So we're going to apply this to junction 1, and the currents in is just I0. So on the left-hand side of the equation, I'm going to write I0. And the currents coming out of that junction, we have I1 here, and I2 here. So on the right side of the equation, we'll have I1 plus I2. This junction rule, by the way, is just a consequence of the conservation of charge. Now, if I apply the junction rule to junction 2, we'll have I1 coming in, as well as I2 coming in. So on the left-hand side of the equation will be I1 plus I2, and we have I0 coming out. So on the right side, we have I0. This is exactly what we have already written, so we're not going to use that equation. Now we apply the loop rule to loop A, which states that the sum of the voltages around a closed loop is equal to 0. Starting in the upper left-hand corner, we're going to move clockwise around loop A. And the first component we get to is the 100 ohm resistor. Now here we're traveling clockwise, so we're coming down this leg, moving with the direction of the current. This means we're going to have a voltage drop across the resistor, negative IR. So I'm going to write negative I2 times 100 ohms to indicate the voltage drop. And we continue to move clockwise around loop A until we get to our next component, which is the 1.5 volt battery. Here we're moving from low to high, negative to positive. This indicates a voltage lift, positive V. So I'm going to write plus 1.5 volts, and that's the last component in this loop, so I set it equal to 0. Next, we use the loop rule to analyze loop B. Starting again in the upper left-hand corner, we travel around clockwise until we get to the first component, 9 volt battery. Traveling from high to low, that means a voltage drop, minus 9 volts. Continuing around loop B, we get to the 200 ohm resistor. We're traveling clockwise, which is with the direction of I1. That's going to indicate a voltage drop, minus IR. 200 ohm resistor, traveling. So I'm going to write plus 1.5 volts, and that's the last component in this loop, so I set it equal to 0. Positive around negative IR. So I'm going to write negative I2 times 100. We're going to move clockwise around loop A, which states that the sum of the voltages around a closed loop is equal to 0. Starting in the upper left-hand corner, we're going to move clockwise around loop A. And the first component we get to is the 100 ohm resistor. Now here we're traveling clockwise, so we're coming down this leg, moving with the direction of the current. This means we're going to have a voltage drop across the resistor, negative IR. So I'm going to write negative I2 times 100 ohms to indicate the voltage drop. And we continue to move clockwise around loop A until we get to our next component, which is the 1.5 volt battery. Here we're moving from low to high, negative to positive. This indicates a voltage lift, positive V. So I'm going to write plus 1.5 volts, and that's the last component in this loop, so I set it equal to 0. Next, we use the loop rule to analyze loop B. Starting again in the upper left-hand corner, we travel around clockwise until we get to the first component, 9 volt battery. Traveling from high to low, that means a voltage drop, minus 9 volts. Continuing around loop B, we get to the 200 ohm resistor. We're traveling clockwise, which is with the direction of I1. That's going to indicate a voltage drop, minus IR. So I write minus I1 times 200 ohms. and then we continue around loop B up the middle leg until we get to the 100 ohm resistor. Here we're traveling up the leg, whereas the current is traveling down. This is going to indicate a voltage lift, plus IR. So I write plus I2 times 100 ohms, complete loop B, set this equal to 0. And at this point, the physics of determining the current in this problem is done. All that's left is some algebra. We have 3 equations, 3 unknowns. We can solve this. I'm going to start with the middle equation here. Solve for I2. Now I'm going to do something a little unorthodox for physicists. I'm going to drop the units. This is pretty much the only time I ever do this, but when using Kirchhoff's rules, it makes the equations much easier to handle, especially when they get really hairy. So this is what my equation looks like. I'm going to solve this for I2. I2 is equal to 0.015 amps, or 15 milliamps. I box this up. And now I'm going to use this value to solve for I1 in the equation above. I'm going to plug it in here and solve for I1. Again, I'm going to drop my units, rewriting the equation. By the way, if you're comfortable with linear algebra, you may want to set these equations up in a matrix and solve for the variables that way. Often, that is a much simpler way of handling the algebra. In this case, I'm just going to plug and chug. So this product is equal to 1.5 volts. Move it to the other side. I have negative 200 I1 is equal to positive 7.5. So we have I1 equals 0.0375 amps. Oh, don't forget this negative sign here. That's important. Negative 0.0375 amps, or negative 37.5 milliamps. So what does this negative sign tell us? This negative sign tells us that the direction that we chose for I1 is the wrong direction. Remember how we picked it arbitrarily at the beginning of the problem? Well, here's where we find out that the actual direction of positive charge flow is the other way. No harm, no foul. Now we know the correct direction of the currents. So we're going to take I1 and I2, plug them into the junction rule to determine I0. So I0 is equal to negative 0.0375 plus 0.015. So we have I0 is equal to negative 0.0225 amps, or negative 22.5 milliamps. I'm going to box this up. And again, what this negative sign is telling us is the direction that we assigned for current is the incorrect direction of the positive charge flow. It's actually moving the other way. So now that we have the currents in this circuit, we can determine the voltage drops across resistors using the current and the resistance values. In other words, we're going to use Ohm's law. So for current, we use the 15 milliamp value and the 100 ohm value. And we find out that the voltage drop across the 100 ohm resistor is going to be 1.5.
Nantak na ako. Sobra. Hindi ako makafocus. Oh my goodness. Reflection, matulog, para mas makintindi. Second is KVL, here, Kirchhoff's. Jesus. Lesson learned, matulog, mahal,